At 11:47 a.m. on December 31st, 1944, Captain Glenn Rojohn felt a violent shudder tear through his B-17 flying fortress 20,000 feet above the North Sea, watching Lieutenant William McNab's bomber rising directly into his aircraft from below. 25 years old, 32 combat missions, 0 mid-air collisions until now. The 100 bombers attacking Hamburg that morning had faced approximately 50 German Messerschmitt fighters and heavy flak that already claimed 11 B-17s. Metal screamed against metal. Rojohn's B-17, the little skipper, lurched sideways. The collision happened so fast that neither pilot could react. McNab had been filling a gap in the formation left by another downed bomber. German fighters had scattered the tight defensive boxes. Visibility through the flak smoke made maintaining proper spacing nearly impossible. The propeller blades and top turret guns of McNab's plane, 9 Lives, punched upward through the belly of Rojohn's aircraft. The two bombers locked together. Rojohn pulled back on the controls. Nothing responded normally. The yoke felt wrong. The aircraft wanted to roll left and dive. His co-pilot, Second Lieutenant William Leake, already had his feet braced against the instrument panel, pulling back with everything he had. The combined weight of 2 fully loaded B-17s, nearly 60,000 pounds of aluminum, fuel, bombs, and men fought against them. Rojohn looked down through the cockpit floor. He could see McNab's cockpit below him. The two aircraft had become one grotesque 8-engine monster. The propeller from the lower plane had chewed through his fuselage. Hydraulic fluid sprayed across the interior. Electrical systems sparked and died. Half his instruments went dark. The Bloody Hundredth had already lost 12 aircraft on this mission, 108 men dead, missing, or about to be captured. December 31st would be remembered as one of the 5 worst days in the group's combat history. Rojohn knew the statistics. The average B-17 crew in 1943 survived 11 missions. He had beaten those odds. Now, physics and gravity were about to collect their debt. If you want to see how Rojohn and Leake kept 2 locked B-17s in the air, please hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories of courage. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Rojohn. The aircraft began losing altitude, 100 feet per minute, then 200. Rojohn tried the rudder pedals. Some response, but not enough. The elevators barely functioned with half the control cables severed by McNab's propeller. He could feel the lower aircraft's weight pulling them into a spin. The radio crackled with voices from other crews in the formation. Someone reported seeing the collision. Another voice called out, "More German fighters at 3 o'clock high." Rojohn ignored them all. His entire world had narrowed to the control column in his hands and the altimeter unwinding in front of him. Behind him in the fuselage, his crew were trying to assess the damage. The ball turret gunner reported fire in the lower aircraft. Rojohn could smell it now. Aviation fuel and burning electrical insulation. The top turret gunner said he could see clear through the floor into McNab's bomber. The two aircraft were inseparable. The North Sea waited 5 miles below. German-occupied territory lay 20 miles ahead. Rojohn checked his fuel gauges. The collision had ruptured something. Fuel streamed from multiple punctures. He had maybe 20 minutes of flight time remaining, maybe less. The lower bomber had started burning. Black smoke poured over his left wing. He could hear ammunition cooking off in the flames, 50 caliber rounds exploding like popcorn. Each detonation shook both aircraft. The fire was spreading. And Rojohn had to make a decision that would determine whether anyone walked away from this. Rojohn turned the conjoined aircraft left. The maneuver took every ounce of strength both pilots could generate. The control surfaces responded like they were moving through molasses. Banking 15 degrees required the force normally needed for a full 90-degree turn. Leake kept his boots planted against the panel, arms locked, pulling back to prevent the nose from dropping. They were heading back toward German territory. England lay 70 miles northwest across the North Sea. Impossible! The aircraft would never make it. Rojohn aimed for the German coast 20 miles south. Neutral mathematics governed his choice. Fuel consumption, rate of descent, wind speed, distance. The numbers allowed only one answer. The fire from McNab's aircraft had spread to the wing root. Orange flames licked across the aluminum skin of the little skipper's left wing. The heat penetrated the cockpit. Rojohn could feel it on his face. The instrument panel temperature climbed past normal operating range. More hydraulic lines failed. The rudder pedals went mushy. Steering now depended almost entirely on differential engine thrust. Rojohn adjusted throttles on the 4 engines, using power to force the locked aircraft where the controls could not. The technique worked, but consumed fuel at an accelerating rate. Below them, through the hole torn in the fuselage, Rojohn glimpsed movement in McNab's cockpit, or possibly just shadows from the smoke. He could not tell if McNab or his co-pilot still lived. The radio gave no indication. No voices from the lower aircraft. The impact had either killed them instantly or rendered them unconscious. Perhaps the flames had already reached them. Rojohn had no way to know. The 2 crews had become passengers on a falling piece of wreckage that still somehow maintained controlled flight. The altimeter showed 18,000 feet. Altitude loss had accelerated, 300 feet per minute now. The fire was consuming the aircraft faster than Rojohn had calculated. He keyed the intercom and ordered his crew to bail out. The top turret gunner and radio operator, Technical Sergeants Orville Elkin and Edward Newhouse, acknowledged immediately. They made their way aft toward the waist door. The navigator, Second Lieutenant Robert Washington, and bombardier, Sergeant James Shirley, followed. 4 men moving through a burning aircraft, stepping carefully around the gaping hole where McNab's propeller had chewed through the floor. Waist gunner Sergeant Roy Little and tail gunner Staff Sergeant Francis Chase prepared to jump. The ball turret gunner had already reported his position uninhabitable. Smoke filled the turret. He had cranked himself up into the fuselage, abandoning his station. 6 men from Rojohn's crew would bail out. The parachutes would deploy. They would drift down into German territory and spend the rest of the war as prisoners. But they would live. Rojohn ordered Leake to go. The co-pilot shook his head. No words. Just that single gesture. Leake understood the physics as clearly as Rojohn did. One pilot could not hold the controls alone. Without both men pulling back with maximum force, the aircraft would enter a flat spin within seconds. Centrifugal force would pin any remaining pilot to a seat. Bailing out would become impossible. Leake refusing the order meant both men would ride the burning wreckage to the ground. Or, Rojohn would have to physically overpower his co-pilot and throw him out of the aircraft. The crew began jumping. 1 man every few seconds. The aircraft lurched each time someone exited through the waist door. The weight distribution kept changing. Rojohn compensated with throttle adjustments. 17,000 feet. The smoke in the cockpit thickened. Visibility dropped to a few yards. Both pilots could barely see the instruments. The compass gyrated uselessly. The artificial horizon had failed. Navigation relied entirely on glimpses of the ground through breaks in the smoke. 16,000 feet. The last man jumped. Radio operator Newhouse went out the waist door, and his parachute blossomed white against the gray winter sky. Rojohn and Leake were alone. 2 pilots in a cockpit attached to a burning aircraft attached to another burning aircraft. The fuel gauge read nearly empty. Flames consumed both bombers. The German coast appeared ahead through the haze. Rojohn could see the shoreline, towns, fields, the ground rising up to meet them at 300 feet per minute. And somewhere below them, McNab and his co-pilot either already dead or dying in their locked cockpit, unable to escape, unable to do anything except wait for impact. 15,000 feet. Rojohn made a decision that violated every principle of bomber operations. He reached forward and pulled the mixture controls for all 4 of his engines to idle cut off. The right cyclone radials sputtered and died. The propellers windmilled to a stop. Suddenly, the only engines running were the 4 on McNab's aircraft below them. The locked bombers were now flying on the power of the lower B-17 alone. The physics made sense. 8 engines consumed fuel twice as fast as 4. The reduced power demand meant McNab's remaining fuel would last longer, and shutting down the top engines eliminated one source of heat feeding the fire. The maneuver worked. Partially. The rate of descent slowed to 200 feet per minute. The fire, deprived of the airflow from Rojohn's propellers, burned less intensely across the wing route. Visibility in the cockpit improved as smoke decreased. Leake eased his grip slightly on the control column. The aircraft still required full back pressure to prevent a dive, but the reduction in total weight from the stopped engines made the load marginally more bearable. Marginally. Both pilots still had their feet braced hard against the instrument panel, pulling with locked arms and aching shoulders. 14,000 feet. German civilians on the ground looked up and pointed. Some believed they were witnessing a new Allied secret weapon, an 8-engine double bomber. Reports would later circulate through German intelligence networks about this strange aircraft. The observers saw two distinct fuselages, one riding piggyback on the other, trailing smoke, descending slowly toward the farmland east of Wilhelmshaven. Several civilians ran for cover, assuming the bomber would crash into their village. Others stood transfixed, watching something no one had ever seen before. Rojohn scanned the terrain below. He needed flat ground, a field, something without buildings or trees. The winter landscape offered mostly farmland. Patches of snow covered the stubble from harvested crops. A few dirt roads cut across the geometric pattern of fields. No suitable landing zone appeared. Every open area ended in a hedgerow, a ditch, a stone wall, or a barn. Landing a single B-17 required at least 1,500 feet of clear runway. Landing two locked B-17s required a miracle and terrain that did not exist. 12,000 feet. The fire flared again. Wind, shifting through the damaged structure, found new fuel sources. Hydraulic fluid ignited. The flames spread forward along the left wing toward the No. 2 engine nacelle. If the fire reached the fuel tanks in that wing, both aircraft would explode. Rojohn had perhaps 5 minutes before thermal stress caused structural failure. The wing would simply fold upward, torn off by aerodynamic forces acting on weakened metal. The locked bombers would tumble out of control. No possibility of survival. From his cockpit, suspended above McNab's aircraft, Rojohn could now see directly into the lower B-17's interior through the torn metal. He glimpsed movement, then nothing. The angle made observation difficult. Smoke obscured details. McNab and his co-pilot, Second Lieutenant Nelson Vaughn, had not responded to radio calls. The impact might have killed them instantly, or rendered them unconscious, or trapped them in their seats, wounded and unable to move. Rojohn had no way to communicate with them. The intercom systems of the two aircraft were not connected. He could only watch the lower cockpit and wonder whether anyone below still lived. 10,000 feet. 4 crew members from McNab's bomber had managed to bail out before the collision locked the aircraft together. The tail gunner, both waist gunners, and the ball turret gunner had escaped. But McNab, Vaughn, and 4 other crew members remained trapped in the lower aircraft. The fire consumed their bomber from the tail forward. Metal groaned and twisted. Rivets popped loose under the thermal expansion. The structural integrity of both aircraft degraded with each passing second. Rojohn spotted a large open field 3 miles ahead. Snow-covered, flat, perhaps 1,800 feet long. Trees bordered the eastern edge. A farmhouse stood at the western end. The field was barely adequate for a normal landing. For 2 locked bombers trailing fire, it represented certain catastrophe. But Rojohn had no alternatives remaining. The fuel gauge showed empty. The engines on the lower aircraft would quit within minutes. When that happened, both bombers would drop like stones. He had to attempt a landing while some control authority remained. He aimed for the field. 8,000 feet. The ground rushed up faster now. 7,000 feet. The No. 3 engine on McNab's aircraft coughed and quit. Fuel starvation. The propeller continued windmilling in the airstream, but produced no thrust. Rojohn felt the asymmetric power immediately. The locked bombers yawed hard to the right. He compensated with left rudder. The pedals barely responded. Most of the rudder control cables had been severed in the collision. He advanced the throttle on McNab's No. 1 engine to maximum power, using the differential thrust to counteract the yaw. The technique worked, but increased fuel consumption on the remaining 3 engines. The mathematics of survival had just become significantly worse. 6,000 feet. Rojohn trimmed the aircraft for the approach, or tried to. The trim wheels spun uselessly. No cable tension. The elevator trim system had failed completely. Both pilots would need to maintain full back pressure on the controls throughout the landing. Any reduction in force would result in the nose dropping and the aircraft impacting nose first at over 100 knots. A nose first impact would kill them instantly. Leak adjusted his foot position against the instrument panel, seeking better leverage. His legs trembled from sustained exertion. Rojohn's arms burned with accumulated lactic acid. Neither man could maintain this effort much longer. 5,000 feet. The No. 4 engine on the lower aircraft lost power. Not a complete failure, but a steady degradation. RPM dropped from 2,300 to 1,800. Oil pressure fluctuated wildly. Black smoke poured from the exhaust stacks. The engine was destroying itself. combat damage or thermal stress, or simply mechanical failure after hours of operation under extreme conditions. The cause did not matter. The result was a further reduction in available thrust. The locked bombers descended faster, 250 feet per minute, then 300. Rojohn could do nothing to arrest the increased descent rate. 4,000 feet. The airspeed indicator showed 130 knots, too fast for landing. Rojohn needed to reduce speed to 90 knots for touchdown, but reducing throttle would eliminate the small amount of lift keeping both aircraft airborne. He faced an impossible equation. Land too fast, and the aircraft would cartwheel across the field, disintegrating on impact. Maintain current speed, and overshoot the field entirely, crashing into the trees beyond. He chose a compromise. Gradual throttle reduction, slow deceleration. Hope the remaining thrust would sustain flight long enough to reach the field. 3,000 feet. Wind gusts buffeted the locked bombers. Winter storm systems moving across northern Germany created turbulent conditions at low altitude. The aircraft pitched and rolled in response to each gust. Rojohn fought the controls constantly. Small corrections, quick throttle adjustments. The workload exceeded anything he had experienced in 32 previous missions. His vision narrowed to the instruments, the field ahead, the altimeter unwinding. Everything else ceased to exist. Leak maintained back pressure while Rojohn flew the approach. Two men functioning as one. 2,000 feet. Rojohn could see individual buildings on the farm below. A barn, a house, outbuildings, people running across the yard. German soldiers from a nearby garrison moving toward the expected crash site. The civilians had evacuated. The field lay empty except for patches of snow and the dark stubble of winter wheat. The eastern tree line stood perhaps 60 feet tall, dense pine forest. Rojohn would have to clear those trees with minimal margin. A miscalculation of 5 feet would result in both bombers clipping the treetops and tumbling to earth in a fireball. 1,000 feet. The No. 2 engine on McNab's aircraft began running rough, misfiring, loss of power. Only 2 engines now produced reliable thrust. The descent rate increased to 400 feet per minute. The locked bombers fell through the cold December air like a brick with wings. Rojohn advanced the remaining good engines to full power. The manifold pressure gauges redlined. Engine temperatures climbed past maximum operating limits. Metal components inside the engines expanded beyond design tolerances. Pistons scraped cylinder walls. Bearings seized. The engines would fail within minutes. But Rojohn only needed them to last another 60 seconds. 500 feet. He could see the texture of the snow in the field, individual furrows in the frozen dirt. The farmhouse windows reflected gray winter light. German soldiers took cover behind vehicles parked near the barn. They expected an explosion. They expected debris raining across the farm. They had no reason to expect anything else. Rojohn lined up the locked bombers with the field. Slight correction left. Throttle adjustment. Airspeed 110 knots. Still too fast. He eased the throttles back another fraction. The descent rate jumped to 500 feet per minute. The trees rushed toward them at 90 miles per hour. 300 feet. The pine trees filled Rojohn's vision, individual branches visible, snow clinging to the needles. The locked bombers descended toward the tree line at 400 feet per minute. Rojohn pulled back harder on the controls. Leak matched his effort. Both men straining against the yoke with every remaining ounce of strength. The nose lifted slightly. 5 degrees. Then 7. The angle of attack increased just enough to clear the treetops. The tail section of McNab's lower aircraft passed within 3 feet of the highest branches. Pine needles brushed against the aluminum skin. A small branch snapped off and tumbled away. Then the locked bombers were over the field. 200 feet. Rojohn chopped the throttles. The engine spooled down. The sudden loss of thrust caused an immediate sink rate increase. 600 feet per minute. The ground rushed up. Rojohn and Leak pulled back desperately, trying to arrest the descent, trying to flare the aircraft for landing. The controls felt like they were moving through concrete. The combined weight of both aircraft fought against any change in pitch attitude. 100 feet. 50 feet. The stall warning horn blared. Airspeed dropped through 90 knots. The aircraft shuddered on the edge of aerodynamic stall. 20 feet. McNab's B-17 hit the frozen ground first. The impact occurred at 87 knots with a descent rate of 500 feet per minute. The landing gear of the lower bomber had been retracted since the collision. The aircraft belly landed across the snow-covered field. Metal shrieked against frozen earth. The aluminum skin tore open along the fuselage underside. Dirt and snow sprayed in all directions. The impact forces exceeded 15 Gs. Everything not secured became a projectile. The structure of McNab's bomber, already weakened by fire and combat damage, began disintegrating immediately. The fuel tanks in McNab's wings ruptured on impact. Aviation gasoline sprayed across hot engine components. Ignition was instantaneous. The explosion consumed the entire lower aircraft in a fraction of a second. The fireball expanded outward, engulfing McNab's fuselage, wings, and tail section. The blast wave slammed upward into Rojohn's B-17, still suspended above the lower bomber by the locked collision point. The force of the explosion acted like a catapult. The little skipper vaulted forward and upward, thrown clear of the burning wreckage below. Rojohn's aircraft separated from the lower bomber during the explosion. The propeller blades and gun turret that had locked the two planes together tore free. The little skipper became airborne again for approximately 2 seconds, traveling forward at 70 knots, climbing to a height of 15 feet above the field. Then, gravity reasserted control. The bomber slammed back to Earth, nose first. The impact compressed the nose wheel strut completely. The strut punched upward through the bombardier compartment. The plexiglass nose cone shattered. Metal buckled and twisted. The fuselage hit next. The belly landing gear had also been retracted. The aircraft scraped across the field on its aluminum skin, throwing up a rooster tail of dirt, snow, and debris. The friction generated tremendous heat. Sparks showered from the contact points. The bomber slid sideways, yawing 30 degrees to the left as the right wing dug into the ground. The massive right cyclone engines tore loose from their mounts and tumbled across the field. Propeller blades snapped off and cartwheeled away. The left wing, already damaged by fire, crumpled under the lateral forces. The left wingtip struck a wooden storage building at the edge of the field. The impact demolished the building completely. Boards and timber exploded outward. The wing sheared off at the root. The fuselage continued sliding another 100 feet before aerodynamic drag and ground friction finally arrested the forward motion. The wreckage came to rest in a cloud of dust and smoke. Everything behind the wing roots had been destroyed. The tail section had broken off during the slide. The waist section lay crumpled and twisted. Only the nose compartment remained relatively intact. Inside that nose section, Rojohn and Leek sat motionless in their seats. Both men still gripped the control column. Both still had their feet braced against the instrument panel. The crash sequence had lasted 7 seconds from initial impact to final stop. Neither pilot had released the controls during any of those 7 seconds. They looked at each other through the smoke and dust. No injuries, no broken bones. The nose structure, heavily reinforced to protect the bombardier during missions, had absorbed the impact forces and preserved the cockpit space. Behind them, visible through the torn fuselage, fire consumed what remained of both bombers. 300 yards away, McNab's aircraft burned in the crater created by the explosion. McNab and Vaughn had died on impact. Their bodies remained in the lower cockpit, consumed by the fire. The 4 crew members who had stayed with McNab's aircraft until the collision were also dead. 10 men total from the lower bomber. 6 survived by bailing out. 4 did not. German soldiers approached the wreckage cautiously, weapons raised, expecting resistance. Rojohn released the control column. His hands would not straighten. The fingers remained locked in the curved position from gripping the yoke for the past 23 minutes. He flexed them slowly, working feeling back into the cramped muscles. Leek pulled his feet down from the instrument panel. His legs shook uncontrollably. Neither man spoke. The silence inside the shattered nose compartment felt absolute, despite the roar of flames consuming the wreckage behind them. The cockpit sat at a 40-degree angle, nose down in the frozen dirt. The instrument panel had collapsed partially inward. Broken glass covered every surface. Rojohn unbuckled his harness and tried to stand. His legs gave out immediately. He caught himself against the co-pilot's seat. Leek crawled through the hole where the bombardier compartment had been. The plexiglass nose cone lay scattered across the field in thousands of fragments. Cold December air rushed through the opening. The temperature inside the cockpit had been over 100 degrees from the fire. The outside air felt like ice water against exposed skin. German soldiers surrounded the wreckage within 90 seconds of the crash. Approximately 20 men from a garrison stationed 3 kilometers away. They had watched the descent and landing. They had seen the explosion that killed McNab's crew. They approached with rifles raised, shouting commands in German. Rojohn and Leake climbed out through the nose opening with their hands visible and empty. Neither man carried weapons. Neither man resisted. The soldiers searched them quickly and efficiently. Watches removed. Dog tags checked. Personal items confiscated. The process took less than 3 minutes. The German officer in charge, a Wehrmacht Hauptmann, examined the wreckage with visible confusion. 2 distinct bomber tails lay scattered across the field. 2 sets of wings. 8 engine nacelles. He walked the debris field, trying to understand what had occurred. The soldiers had reported seeing a strange double aircraft descending. The physical evidence confirmed something extraordinary had happened. The Hauptmann questioned Rojohn through a translator. How many aircraft? How did they lock together? Why did the pilot return to Germany instead of attempting to reach England? Rojohn provided minimal responses. Name, rank, serial number. Nothing more. 6 parachutes had deployed from Rojohn's aircraft before the crash. The crew members landed scattered across a 5-kilometer area. German patrols found them within 2 hours. Navigator Washington watched the final descent from his parachute harness. He saw the locked bombers trail smoke across the sky. He saw them disappear behind the tree line. He saw the column of black smoke rise from the crash site. He assumed both pilots had died. The German soldiers who captured him reported otherwise. Rojohn and Leake had survived. Washington could not believe it. Nobody could believe it. 4 crew members from McNab's bomber had also bailed out before the collision locked the aircraft together. German patrols captured all 4 within 3 hours. The tail gunner, both waist gunners, and the ball turret gunner joined Rojohn's crew as prisoners of war. 10 men total survived the Hamburg mission from the 2 aircraft involved in the collision. McNab, Vaughn, and 4 other crew members from the lower bomber perished in the explosion. The radio operator, navigator, bombardier, and top turret gunner never escaped the burning aircraft. The Germans transported Rojohn and Leake to a temporary holding facility near Wilhelmshaven, a small stone building that had formerly served as a customs house. They spent the first night locked in separate rooms. No heat, no blankets, guards outside the doors. The adrenaline from the crash had worn off. The reality of captivity settled in. 5 months remained until Germany's surrender. Rojohn had no way of knowing that timeline. For all he knew, the war might continue for years. The Germans might execute captured bomber crews as war criminals. Rumors of such executions had circulated among American airmen for months. Morning came. 2 German intelligence officers arrived to begin interrogations. They had questions about the locked bombers. They had questions about American tactics and formations. They had questions about bomb loads and target selection. They had questions about everything. The interrogators were professionals, trained in extracting information from uncooperative subjects. They had techniques refined over years of war. Rojohn and Leake had 2 weeks of questioning ahead of them, 2 weeks in which they would learn exactly how much pain could be inflicted without leaving permanent marks. The Hauptmann who had captured them watched from the doorway as the interrogators prepared their first session. The interrogators worked methodically. They started with basic questions: unit designation, base location, aircraft serial numbers, mission objectives. Rojohn provided name, rank, serial number. Nothing else. The interrogators expected resistance. They had procedures for resistance. The first session lasted 4 hours. No physical violence. Just questions repeated endlessly in slightly different forms. Attempts to catch inconsistencies in responses. Psychological pressure designed to erode willpower through exhaustion and disorientation. Leake underwent identical treatment in a separate room. The interrogators kept the 2 pilots isolated. Standard practice. Prevent coordination of stories. Maximize confusion and fear. The Germans wanted tactical information about American bombing operations. They wanted details about the Norden bomb site. They wanted to understand how the locked aircraft had remained airborne for 23 minutes. The physics seemed impossible. The interrogators suspected some new American technology or technique they had not encountered before. The sessions continued for 14 days, morning and afternoon interrogations, sometimes lasting 6 hours without break. The interrogators never raised their voices, never threatened violence. They simply asked questions and noted responses, or noted the lack of responses. They compiled detailed files on both pilots, background information extracted from dog tags and personal items, analysis of physical condition, observations about personality and temperament. The German intelligence apparatus operated with methodical efficiency even this late in the war. After 2 weeks, the interrogators concluded neither pilot would provide useful information beyond the minimum required by Geneva Convention. Rojohn and Leek were transferred to a permanent prisoner of war camp 60 kilometers east, Stalag Luft facility designated for captured airmen, barracks surrounded by wire fences and guard towers. Approximately 800 American and British prisoners held in compounds separated by nationality. The camp had existed since 1942. 3 years of captured crews. 3 years of men waiting for the war to end. Rojohn arrived at the camp on January 14, 1945. His crew members were already there. Washington, Shirley, Elkin, Newhouse, Little, and Chase had been processed through the same interrogation facility days earlier. The reunion occurred in Barracks Number 12. 6 men who had bailed out of a burning aircraft. 2 men who had ridden that aircraft to the ground. All 8 alive, all 8 together again. The odds against such an outcome seemed incalculable. The crew members from McNab's bomber were housed in a different compound. Rojohn saw them occasionally during exercise periods in the yard. Winter in northern Germany tested the prisoners severely. Inadequate heat, insufficient food. The Red Cross parcels that had sustained POW camps earlier in the war arrived sporadically now. Allied bombing had disrupted German rail networks. Supply chains collapsed. The prisoners received 1 meal daily, thin soup, black bread, sometimes potatoes, calories barely sufficient for survival. Men lost weight rapidly. Rojohn dropped from 170 pounds to 138 pounds by March. He developed a persistent cough from the cold and damp conditions in the barracks. The guards grew increasingly nervous as winter progressed into spring. News from the fronts reached the camp through clandestine radio receivers the prisoners had built from scavenged components. The Russians advancing from the east, the Americans and British pushing across the Rhine from the west, Germany collapsing between the two fronts. The guards understood what Allied liberation might mean for them. Some discussed abandoning the camp before Russian or American forces arrived. Others talked about last stands and fighting to the death. The prisoners watched and waited and hoped the guards would simply leave. April brought warmer weather and increasing chaos. German units retreating through the area sometimes stopped at the camp seeking food or supplies. The camp commandant refused. The soldiers left angry. Artillery rumbled in the distance, some days to the east, some days to the west. The front lines were contracting. The camp sat in a shrinking pocket of German-controlled territory. Rojohn and the other prisoners prepared for rapid evacuation. They packed what few possessions they had. They organized into groups by squadron and base. They rehearsed escape procedures in case the guards attempted to march them deeper into Germany ahead of Allied advances. May 4, 1945. British armored units liberated the camp at 1400 hours. The guards had fled during the night. The prisoners woke to find the gates open and guard towers empty. Nobody knew where to go or what to do. They simply stood in the compound, staring at the abandoned wire and the approaching British tanks. 5 months of captivity ended without ceremony or drama. Rojohn walked through the gate carrying nothing but the clothes he wore. Behind him, the barracks stood silent. Ahead, the road led west toward England and home. The British transported the liberated prisoners to a processing center in Belgium. Medical examinations, delousing, new uniforms, hot food. The first real meal in 5 months. Rojohn and Leek returned to the United States in June 1945. They traveled separately on different transport ships. The Army Air Forces conducted debriefing sessions at separation centers. Intelligence officers wanted detailed accounts of the Hamburg mission and the Piggyback Flight. The story had circulated through 8th Air Force units stationed in England. Witnesses from other bombers in the formation had filed reports. The German civilians who watched the landing had been interviewed after occupation forces moved into the area. The physical evidence remains scattered across that farm field east of Wilhelmshaven. Fragments of two B-17s, impact craters, burn patterns in the soil. The military recognized the achievement. Both pilots received the Distinguished Flying Cross. The citation acknowledged extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight, maintaining control of two locked aircraft under combat conditions, saving the lives of crew members through superior airmanship. The medals were presented in separate ceremonies. Rojohn received his at a base in Pennsylvania. Leake received his in California. Neither man attended the other's ceremony. The war had ended. Units disbanded. Crews scattered across the country to resume interrupted lives. Rojohn never flew again. The ambition to become a commercial airline pilot had died somewhere over the North Sea on December 31st. He returned to Pennsylvania and joined his father's heating and air conditioning business in McKeesport. The work was steady and predictable. No flak, no fighters. No burning aircraft falling from the sky. He married, raised 4 children, attended church regularly, lived quietly in a small town where most people never knew about the Distinguished Flying Cross in his dresser drawer or the 5 months he spent in a German prison camp. He did not talk about the war, not to his wife, not to his children, not to anyone. The memories stayed locked away for decades. Only at reunions of the 100th Bomb Group veterans did fragments of the story emerge. Other crew members would mention the piggyback flight. Someone would ask Rojohn to describe what happened. He would provide brief answers, factual statements, no elaboration. The emotional weight of that day remained private. McNab and Vaughn had died. 4 other men from the lower bomber had burned. Those deaths were not entertaining stories to share over dinner. Leake followed a similar path. He returned to civilian life in California and rarely discussed his military service. The 2 pilots lost contact after demobilization. Years passed, then decades. The 100th Bomb Group Association organized annual reunions beginning in the 1960s. Rojohn attended occasionally. Leake did not. The connection between the 2 men, who had shared 23 minutes of sustained crisis at 20,000 feet, faded into the past. 1987, Long Beach, California. 100th Bomb Group reunion. Rojohn attended with his son David. Leake showed up unexpectedly after 42 years of absence from group events. The 2 men saw each other across the hotel conference room. Recognition was immediate, despite the passage of time. They were both in their late 60s now, gray hair, reading glasses. The physical transformation from 25-year-old combat pilots to retirement-age civilians was complete, but something in the posture and bearing remained unchanged. They shook hands. They talked for hours. They shared details about the flight that neither had discussed with anyone else for 4 decades. Leake died the following year, 1988. The reunion in Long Beach had been his last public appearance. Rojohn continued attending group events for another 15 years. He was inducted into the Hall of Valor at the Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Hall and Museum in Pittsburgh in 2002. He died in 2003 at age 81. His daughter Cindy published a book about his experiences in 2018. The Piggyback Flight Pilot's Journey. 260 images from his mother's collection, mission logs, letters from the POW camp, witness statements, the complete documentation of one extraordinary day and one extraordinary act of courage. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor, hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about pilots who saved lives with courage and skill and refused to abandon their crew. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? Our community stretches across the entire world. You're not just a viewer. You're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure Glenn Rojohn and William Leake don't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.